20 minutes passed in the freezing darkness before the sounds of searching finally stopped. Maria's teeth were chattering uncontrollably, and she could feel Miguel shivering violently beside her. They couldn't remain hidden much longer without risking hypothermia, but emerging too soon could be fatal if the intruders were still nearby. Carlos made the decision for all of them. "We have to get out," he whispered barely audibly. "Another few minutes, and we won't be able to move at all." He carefully cracked open the freezer door and listened intently. The kitchen appeared to be empty, though they could still hear distant voices and activity from other parts of the compound. The intruders had apparently concluded their search and moved on to other phases of their operation. One by one, they emerged from the freezer, their movements stiff and clumsy from the cold. Maria's hands were numb, and it took several attempts before she could properly grip the door handle. Rosa was in even worse condition, barely able to walk without assistance from Carlos. As they huddled together near the kitchen's central island, trying to restore circulation to their frozen limbs, Maria heard something that made her forget all about the cold. From the direction of the conference area came the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Not the controlled, disciplined shooting of a training exercise, but the chaotic bursts of an active firefight. "The base security must be fighting back," Carlos whispered, hope evident in his voice. But Maria wasn't so sure. The pattern of gunfire sounded wrong somehow, more like execution than combat. Her worst fears were confirmed when they heard a voice over what sounded like a portable loudspeaker system. "Attention, all base personnel. This facility is now under the control of the Liberation Army of Central America. Any resistance will result in the immediate execution of hostages. All military personnel are to report to the main courtyard with weapons secured. You have 15 minutes to comply." The announcement was repeated in Spanish, and Maria felt her stomach drop as she realized the true scope of what was happening. This wasn't just a kidnapping or intelligence operation. It was a full-scale takeover of the military base, with hostages being used to force the surrender of all defensive personnel. Rosa grabbed Maria's arm with trembling fingers. "We need to get to the communication center. If there's any way to call for help from outside the base, that's where it would be." Carlos shook his head. "They would have secured that area first. It's probably surrounded or already under their control." Miguel, who had been silent throughout their ordeal, suddenly spoke up with surprising clarity. "There's another way. The emergency radio in the maintenance building. It operates on a different frequency and has backup power. My uncle works there, and he showed me how to use it." Maria looked at the young man with new respect. Despite his youth and obvious fear, Miguel was thinking strategically about their options. The maintenance building was located on the opposite side of the compound from the main conflict, and it was possible the intruders hadn't yet secured every secondary facility. "How do we get there without being seen?" Rosa asked. Miguel seemed to gain confidence as he explained his knowledge of the base's layout. "There's a service tunnel that connects the mess hall to the maintenance area. It was built for utility lines, but it's big enough for people to crawl through. The entrance is in the storage room where I was hiding when the lights went out." As they made their way carefully toward the storage room, Maria's mind was already working through the implications of what they might accomplish if they could reach the emergency radio. Outside help would be essential to resolve this situation, but any rescue attempt would need to account for the hostages being held by the intruders. The storage room was cramped and cluttered, filled with industrial-sized containers of food and cleaning supplies. Miguel led them to a corner where several large boxes had been moved aside to reveal a metal grate covering what appeared to be a maintenance access point. The opening was small, barely large enough for an adult to crawl through, and completely dark beyond the first few feet. "It's about 100 meters to the other end," Miguel explained. "The tunnel has some branches, but if you stay on the main path and keep going straight, you'll come out in the basement of the maintenance building." Carlos immediately took charge of the plan. "Miguel and I will go. We're the smallest, and we know the base layout best. You two stay here and keep watch. If we're not back in an hour, assume we didn't make it, and try to find another way out." But Maria shook her head firmly. "I'm going with you. If you reach the radio, you'll need someone who can explain exactly what we observed about the intruders. I saw them first, and I can describe their positions and movements." Rosa wanted to come as well, but her condition from the freezer exposure made it clear she wouldn't be able to manage the physical demands of crawling through the narrow tunnel. Reluctantly, she agreed to remain behind and monitor the kitchen area for any signs that the intruders were returning. The tunnel was even more claustrophobic than Maria had expected. The metal walls seemed to close in around them as they crawled forward in complete darkness, following the path by feel and relying on Miguel's memory of the route. The air was stale and thick with dust, making breathing difficult and adding to the sense of panic that threatened to overwhelm her rational thinking. About halfway through the tunnel, they encountered their first major obstacle. A section of the passage had partially collapsed, creating a gap that was barely passable. Miguel went first, squeezing through the narrow opening with considerable difficulty. Maria followed, feeling claustrophobic terror as the metal walls scraped against her shoulders and back. Carlos brought up the rear, and for several terrifying minutes, it seemed like he might not be able to fit through the gap. His broader shoulders caught against the collapsed section, and Maria could hear him struggling to find a way forward. Eventually, by removing his shirt and exhaling completely, he managed to squeeze through, though not without leaving skin behind on the rough metal edges. The remainder of the journey passed in a blur of aching knees, scraped elbows, and growing desperation. Maria lost track of time in the darkness, unsure whether they had been crawling for minutes or hours. Her world narrowed to the simple imperative of moving forward, following Miguel's whispered directions and trying not to think about the weight of metal and earth above their heads. When they finally reached the end of the tunnel, Miguel had to work for several minutes to remove the grate covering the exit. The bolts had rusted over years of neglect, and loosening them without tools required patience and persistence they could barely afford. Every sound seemed amplified in the confined space, and Maria was convinced that anyone in the maintenance building would hear them trying to break out. Finally, the grate came free, and they emerged into the basement of the maintenance facility. The area was dimly lit by emergency lighting, revealing a maze of pipes, electrical panels, and mechanical equipment that served the base's infrastructure. Miguel led them quickly through the basement to a stairway that accessed the main floor of the building. As they climbed the stairs, Maria could hear the distant sounds of activity from the main compound, but the maintenance building itself appeared to be unoccupied. Either the intruders had not yet reached this area, or they had determined it wasn't strategically important enough to warrant immediate attention. The emergency radio was located in a small office on the second floor of the building. Miguel's familiarity with the equipment proved invaluable as he quickly powered up the system and began scanning frequencies for outside contacts. The radio had sufficient range to reach regional military installations, but finding someone who could respond effectively would require both luck and skill. After several minutes of careful frequency adjustment, Miguel managed to establish contact with a military base approximately 50 kilometers away. The officer who responded was initially skeptical of their report, but Maria's detailed description of the intruders' organization and tactics convinced him that they were dealing with a genuine emergency situation. "This is Colonel Rodriguez at Base Sierra. We're receiving reports of communication failures from your location. Can you confirm the nature of the threat?" Carlos took the microphone and provided a concise but comprehensive summary of the situation. Approximately 15 armed intruders have taken control of the base. They've cut power and communications and are holding high-ranking personnel hostage. The attackers appear to be professionally trained and well-equipped. We need immediate assistance. Colonel Rodriguez's response was swift and professional. "Understood. We're mobilizing a rapid response team now. Can you provide intelligence about the intruders' positions and capabilities?" Maria found herself describing everything she had observed, from the initial suspicious behavior during lunch to the coordinated execution of the takeover. Her attention to detail proved crucial in helping the rescue team understand what they would be facing. As they continued radio communications, Miguel monitored other frequencies and discovered that the intruders were using sophisticated communication equipment of their own. Their radio traffic revealed a level of planning and coordination that far exceeded what Maria had initially suspected. The attackers had detailed intelligence about the base's layout, security procedures, and the identities of key personnel. They knew exactly when and where the important meeting would take place, and they had positioned themselves to intercept specific individuals. This wasn't a random attack or opportunistic crime, but a carefully orchestrated operation with specific objectives. They're planning to move the hostages, Miguel reported after listening to several intercepted transmissions. Something about extraction in 30 minutes. The timeline was now critical. The rescue team from Base Sierra would need at least 45 minutes to reach their location, which meant the hostages would likely be gone before help arrived. Unless something could be done to delay the intruders' departure, the kidnapped officials would disappear into the region's lawless border areas where recovery would be nearly impossible. Maria stared out the window of the maintenance building toward the main compound, where she could see vehicles being positioned near the central courtyard. The intruders were clearly preparing for a rapid departure, and their confidence suggested they had successfully neutralized any immediate threat from base security personnel. But, as she watched, Maria noticed something that gave her an idea. The intruders' escape route would take them past several key infrastructure points, including the fuel depot and the main power transformer station. If those facilities could be disabled or made dangerous to approach, it might force the attackers to delay their departure or choose a different route that would give the rescue team time to arrive. "Miguel," she said urgently, "you know all the utility systems for this base. Is there a way to create problems that would interfere with their escape plan?" The young man's eyes lit up with understanding. The main power transformer has a manual override that can cause it to overload and catch fire. And the fuel depot has emergency shutoff valves that would prevent them from refueling their vehicles. Carlos immediately grasped the implications. If we can create enough chaos and delay them by just 20 minutes, the rescue team might arrive in time. It was a desperate plan with enormous risks. If they were caught attempting sabotage, the intruders would certainly kill them. But if they did nothing, the hostages would disappear forever, and the attackers would escape to plan future operations against other targets. Maria made the decision for all of them. We have to try. These people came to our workplace, threatened our friends, and turned our world upside down. We can't just hide and hope someone else fixes this. The three of them quickly planned their approach to the critical infrastructure points. Miguel would handle the power transformer since he understood the technical requirements. Carlos would tackle the fuel depot, using his years of experience with military equipment to locate and activate the emergency systems. Maria would return to the mess hall area to provide intelligence about the intruders' movements and timing. As they prepared to leave the safety of the maintenance building, Maria reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few hours. She had come to work that morning as a quiet kitchen worker whose biggest concern was preparing meals efficiently. Now she was about to engage in acts of sabotage against professional terrorists who had taken over a military base. But she also realized that everything in her background had prepared her for this moment. Her years of careful observation had taught her to notice details others missed. Her understanding of the base's routines and personnel had given her insights into what the attackers were trying to accomplish. And her position in the mess hall had provided her with the early warning that was now proving crucial to mounting any kind of effective response. The irony wasn't lost on her that the very job she had taken out of economic necessity, the work she had sometimes viewed as temporary until better opportunities arose, had placed her in the unique position to potentially save the lives of people far more important and powerful than herself. As they prepared to separate and begin their individual missions, Carlos grabbed Maria's hand. "Whatever happens, you've already done more than anyone could have expected. You spotted them when no one else did, and you got word out when it mattered most." Maria squeezed his hand in return. "We all did what we had to do. Now let's finish it." The next 20 minutes would determine whether their desperate plan could disrupt the intruders' carefully orchestrated operation long enough for help to arrive. Maria had no illusions about their chances of success or survival, but she knew that doing nothing would guarantee failure for everyone trapped on the base. As she made her way back through the darkened compound toward the mess hall, Maria Santos carried with her the weight of responsibility for dozens of lives, and the knowledge that her observations and actions had become the difference between rescue and catastrophe. The kitchen worker who had simply wanted to feed her family and earn an honest living was about to discover whether ordinary people could stand against professional killers when everything depended on their courage and determination. The special dinner service began at 10:30, much later than the usual evening meal. Maria watched as approximately 40 guests filed into the mess hall, a mix of high-ranking military officers, government officials, and what appeared to be foreign dignitaries. The level of security was unlike anything she had witnessed during her time at the base, with armed guards posted at every entrance and additional personnel stationed throughout the dining area. Colonel Martinez moved among the guests with practiced diplomatic efficiency, ensuring everyone was comfortable and that conversations flowed smoothly. Maria caught fragments of discussion as she served the meal, mentions of regional security, cross-border cooperation, and strategic partnerships. Whatever was being discussed tonight clearly carried significant importance beyond the base's normal operations. As Maria refilled water glasses and cleared empty plates, she noticed that the three men from lunch had returned. This time, however, they were dressed differently and positioned themselves as part of the security detail. The sight of them sent a chill through her system, but she forced herself to continue working normally while her mind raced to process this development. Rosa had seen them too, and the two women exchanged a meaningful glance across the dining room. The men were no longer trying to blend in as ordinary soldiers having lunch. Instead, they moved with the confidence of people who belonged among the security personnel, checking exits, observing sight lines, and positioning themselves strategically around the room. Something was terribly wrong, but Maria couldn't determine exactly what. The men appeared to be performing legitimate security functions, yet her instincts screamed danger. She began paying closer attention to their behavior, noting how they communicated with each other through subtle hand signals, and how their attention seemed focused more on the exits and the positions of legitimate security personnel than on potential external threats. At 11:15, as the formal dinner concluded and guests began moving to an adjacent room for continued discussions, Maria observed something that made her blood run cold. One of the three suspicious men received a text message and immediately signaled his companions. Within moments, all three had repositioned themselves near different exits, and Maria could see tension in their postures that hadn't been there before. The realization hit her like a physical blow. These weren't additional security personnel. They were infiltrators, and whatever they were planning was about to happen. The text message had clearly been some kind of signal, and the coordinated movement that followed suggested a well-rehearsed plan was now in motion. Maria's hands trembled as she continued clearing tables, her mind racing to figure out what to do with this information. She couldn't simply walk up to a legitimate security officer and announce her suspicions without concrete evidence. Moreover, if these men were as dangerous as her instincts suggested, drawing attention to herself could put her in immediate danger. As the dining room emptied and the guests moved to the conference area, Maria found herself alone with Rosa and the rest of the kitchen staff. The infiltrators had followed the crowd to the new location, leaving the mess hall temporarily unguarded except for the normal base security protocols. "Rosa," Maria whispered urgently in Spanish. "We need to get word to someone. Those three men from lunch, they're not supposed to be here." Rosa's eyes widened as the implications became clear. "Are you certain? I've been watching them all evening. They're not communicating with the real security team, and they received some kind of signal a few minutes ago. Everything about them is wrong." The two women quickly discussed their options. The base's communication systems were complex, but Maria knew that Sergeant Johnson carried a radio that could reach the security command center directly. The problem was finding him without alerting the potential threats to their suspicions. Carlos, the veteran kitchen worker, approached them with a concerned expression. Despite his limited involvement in the evening's events, his years of experience on military installations had taught him to recognize when something was amiss. "What's happening?" he asked quietly. Maria made a quick decision to trust him with the information. Carlos had connections throughout the base and might know the fastest way to alert security without creating a scene. She quickly explained her observations about the three suspicious men, emphasizing the coordinated behavior and the timing of their repositioning. Carlos listened intently, his weathered face growing more serious with each detail. When Maria finished, he nodded grimly. "I know where Sergeant Johnson is. There's a back way to reach him without going through the main corridor where those men are positioned. As Carlos prepared to leave, the lights in the mess hall suddenly flickered and then went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing everything in an eerie red glow that transformed the familiar space into something ominous and threatening. From somewhere in the distance, Maria could hear shouts and the sound of running feet. The power outage was clearly not accidental. Whatever plan the infiltrators had been waiting to execute was now underway, and the cutting of electrical power suggested a coordinated attack involving more people than just the 3 men Maria had identified. The realization that she had witnessed only a small part of a much larger operation sent terror coursing through her veins. Rosa grabbed Maria's arm. "We need to get out of here now." But as they moved toward the kitchen's rear exit, they heard voices in the corridor beyond. Multiple men were speaking in hushed but urgent tones, and their positioning suggested they had surrounded the mess hall area. The emergency lighting cast long shadows, making it difficult to see clearly, but Maria could make out the silhouettes of at least 6 people moving with military precision through the hallways. Carlos had frozen near the kitchen entrance, apparently having encountered similar obstacles in his attempt to reach Sergeant Johnson. He gestured for the women to get down, and all 3 crouched behind the large preparation tables that dominated the center of the kitchen. The voices grew closer, and Maria could now distinguish individual words. The intruders were speaking a mixture of Spanish and English, coordinating their movements and reporting on their progress. From what she could understand, they had successfully disabled the base's primary power grid and communication systems, and were now moving to secure key personnel who had been attending the evening's meeting. Phase 2 complete, one voice reported. Target area secured. Beginning extraction protocols. Maria's blood ran cold as she realized these weren't just infiltrators planning some kind of sabotage or intelligence-gathering operation. They were here to kidnap the high-ranking officials and foreign dignitaries who had been attending the dinner meeting. The sophistication of their plan and the precision of their execution suggested professional training and extensive preparation. The kitchen's location near the main dining and conference areas meant the intruders would likely use it as a staging area or route of passage. Maria, Rosa, and Carlos were trapped in what was about to become the center of a major security incident, with no way to communicate with legitimate base personnel and limited options for escape. From their hiding position, Maria could see shadows moving past the kitchen windows. The intruders were positioning themselves throughout the compound, and based on the radio chatter she could overhear, they had successfully isolated the conference area where the important guests had been meeting. The operation was proceeding exactly as they had planned, with military efficiency and coordination that suggested extensive intelligence about the base's layout and security procedures. Miguel, the young dishwasher, had been in the storage room when the lights went out and now emerged into the kitchen area looking confused and frightened. Maria quickly signaled for him to get down and remain quiet, but his sudden appearance had created movement that might have been visible to anyone watching the kitchen area. Sure enough, within moments they heard footsteps approaching the kitchen entrance. Multiple people were moving with purpose toward their location, and Maria realized they had probably been spotted. The kitchen's emergency lighting would make it impossible to remain hidden if anyone conducted even a cursory search of the area. Carlos motioned for everyone to move toward the large walk-in freezer at the back of the kitchen. It was the only space that might provide concealment, though Maria knew it would also trap them if they were discovered. The alternative, however, was to remain in the open kitchen where detection was virtually certain. As they crawled carefully toward the freezer, staying low and moving as quietly as possible, Maria heard the unmistakable sound of the kitchen door opening. The intruders had arrived, and from the sound of their movements, there were several of them conducting a systematic search of the area. "Check every corner," a voice commanded in accented English. The communication came from somewhere in this section before we cut the lines. Someone might have seen something they shouldn't have. Maria's heart pounded as she realized their earlier discussion about the suspicious men might have been overheard or that Carlos's attempt to reach Sergeant Johnson had somehow been detected. Either way, The intruders knew that someone in the kitchen area had identified them as threats, and they were now searching for potential witnesses who could compromise their operation. The freezer door was heavy and would make noise when opened, but there was no other choice. Carlos reached it first and began slowly pulling it open, trying to minimize the sound while the rest of them crawled toward the opening. The metallic creak of the hinges seemed impossibly loud in the tense silence, and Maria was certain the intruders would hear it and immediately investigate. Just as Rosa disappeared into the freezer, one of the searchers called out, "Movement in the kitchen area." Investigating now. Heavy footsteps moved rapidly across the kitchen floor, accompanied by the sound of equipment being moved and overturned as the intruders conducted their search. Maria slipped into the freezer just as Carlos pulled the door closed behind them, leaving them in complete darkness and bone-chilling cold. Through the insulated walls, they could hear muffled voices and the continued sounds of the search. The intruders were being thorough, checking every possible hiding place and ensuring no one remained in the area who could interfere with their operation or alert base security to their presence. Inside the freezer, the 4 kitchen staff members huddled together in the darkness, trying to stay warm while remaining completely silent. Maria's mind raced as she considered their situation. They were trapped. The base was under attack by a well-organized group of professional operatives, and key personnel were being held hostage or worse. Even if they survived the immediate danger, there was no way to know how long the intruders planned to remain on the base or what their ultimate objectives were. The cold was already becoming painful, and Maria knew they couldn't remain in the freezer indefinitely without risking serious injury or death from exposure. But emerging too soon would mean certain capture by people who had already demonstrated their willingness to use violence, and who clearly considered civilian witnesses to be liabilities that needed to be eliminated. The morning sun cast long shadows across the military compound as Maria Santos wiped down the last of the breakfast tables. At 28, she had been working in the mess hall for nearly 3 years, and the routine had become second nature. The clatter of metal trays, the steam rising from industrial-sized pots, and the constant chatter of soldiers grabbing their meals created a familiar symphony that had become the soundtrack to her daily life. Maria wasn't supposed to be here. Born in a small village outside Guatemala City, she had dreamed of becoming a teacher. But when her father lost his job at the coffee plantation and her younger brother needed medicine for his chronic asthma, those dreams had to wait. The American military base offered steady work and decent pay for local civilians, and Maria needed both desperately. The base, located in a strategic position near the border, housed approximately 200 personnel. It was a forward operating post that served as a critical communication hub for regional operations. The mess hall where Maria worked was the heart of daily life for everyone stationed there. 3 times a day, soldiers would file in for meals, sharing stories, complaints, and the occasional laugh over plates of food that Maria and her small team prepared with care. Maria had earned respect among the military personnel not just for her cooking skills, but for her keen observation and quiet intelligence. She spoke limited English, but she understood far more than she let on. Over the months, she had learned to read the mood of the base through the conversations she overheard during meals. When tensions were high, the soldiers ate quickly and spoke in hushed tones. When things were calm, laughter echoed off the concrete walls. On this particular Tuesday morning in March, something felt different. Colonel Martinez, the base commander, had called an emergency briefing the night before. Maria had noticed the unusual activity as she cleaned up after dinner. Radio chatter was more frequent than usual, and several of the senior staff remained in the communications center well past their normal hours. As Maria organized the kitchen for the lunch preparation, she reflected on the changes she had witnessed over the past few weeks. There had been increased patrols around the perimeter, and new security protocols had been implemented. Visitors now required additional clearance, and even the local staff underwent more thorough searches when entering the compound each morning. The base's location made it a valuable target for various groups operating in the region. Drug cartels, insurgent groups, and criminal organizations all had reasons to want intelligence about military operations. Colonel Martinez had briefed the civilian staff about potential threats, emphasizing the importance of reporting any suspicious activity or unfamiliar faces. Maria's position in the mess hall gave her a unique vantage point. She saw everyone who came and went, noticed patterns in behavior, and observed conversations that others might miss. Her supervisor, Sergeant Johnson, had often commented on her attention to detail and her ability to spot when something was out of place. The kitchen staff consisted of 5 people, including Maria. There was Carlos, an older man who had worked on various military installations for over a decade. He managed the meat preparations and knew every soldier's preferences by heart. Elena, a cheerful woman in her 40s, handled the vegetables and side dishes. She was known for her ability to make even military rations taste like home cooking. Miguel, barely 20 years old, worked as the dishwasher and general assistant. Despite his youth, he was reliable and had quickly learned the demanding pace of feeding hundreds of people daily. The 5th member of their team was Rosa, Maria's closest friend at the base. Rosa worked the serving line and had a gift for remembering names and faces. She could spot a new person from across the room and had an uncanny ability to sense when someone didn't belong. The 2 women had developed an unspoken communication system during busy meal times, using subtle gestures and glances to coordinate their work efficiently. As the lunch hour approached, Maria began heating the large pots of soup that would feed the afternoon shift. The base operated around the clock, with different groups coming on duty at staggered times. This meant the mess hall was almost always in some stage of food preparation or service, creating a constant flow of activity that Maria had learned to navigate with practiced ease. The radio in the kitchen crackled with routine communications between different sections of the base. Maria had learned to distinguish between normal operational chatter and the tenser communications that indicated potential problems. Today, the radio traffic seemed heavier than usual, with more coded messages and frequent check-ins between patrol units. At exactly 11:45, the lunch crowd began arriving. The early shift workers came first, followed by the administrative staff, and then the afternoon patrol teams preparing for their duties. Maria worked efficiently behind the serving line, ladling portions of food and exchanging brief pleasantries with the soldiers she had come to know well. It was during this busy lunch service that Maria first noticed them. 3 men sitting at a corner table, eating slowly and speaking in voices too quiet to overhear. They wore standard military fatigues, but something about them caught her attention. Their postures were wrong somehow, too rigid, and they seemed more interested in observing the room than in their conversation or their food. Rosa noticed Maria's concerned expression and followed her gaze toward the corner table. The 2 women made eye contact, and Rosa gave an almost imperceptible nod. She had seen them too and shared Maria's unease. Without speaking, they agreed to keep watching. Over the next 20 minutes, Maria observed the 3 men carefully while continuing to serve food to the steady stream of soldiers. The strangers asked no questions, made no casual conversation with other personnel, and seemed to be studying the layout of the mess hall and the patterns of movement within it. When they finally left, they departed separately, each taking a different exit. Maria's instincts told her that something was seriously wrong, but she couldn't quite identify what had triggered her concern. The men had done nothing obviously suspicious, yet every fiber of her being was on high alert. She had learned to trust these feelings during her years working in an environment where vigilance was essential for survival. As the lunch service wound down and the afternoon lull began, Maria found herself replaying every detail of the encounter. The way the first man had held his utensils, the second man's unfamiliar accent when he thanked Rosa for the food, the third man's habit of checking his watch every few minutes. Small details that individually meant nothing, but together painted a picture of people who didn't quite belong. The afternoon passed quietly, but Maria remained on edge. During her break, she considered reporting her concerns to Sergeant Johnson. However, she worried about seeming paranoid or drawing unwanted attention to herself. As a civilian employee, she understood that her role was to work efficiently and stay out of military matters. Yet her growing unease made concentration difficult. Evening came with its usual routine of dinner preparation and service. The base settled into its nighttime rhythm, with reduced staffing and increased security measures. Maria finished her duties by 7 o'clock and prepared to leave for home, as was her normal schedule. But, as she gathered her belongings, Sergeant Johnson approached with an unusual request. "Maria, I know this isn't your regular shift, but we've got a situation developing. Colonel Martinez has asked all civilian staff to work extended hours tonight. We're expecting some important visitors, and we need all hands available for a special dinner service later this evening." Maria nodded, understanding that refusing wasn't really an option. Military bases operated on the principle that everyone contributed when circumstances required it, and tonight was apparently one of those times. She sent word to her family that she would be late and settled in for what promised to be a long night. As darkness fell over the compound, Maria began preparations for the evening meal. The base took on a different character at night, with spotlights creating pools of brightness against the surrounding darkness, and the constant presence of armed guards becoming more noticeable. Radio chatter increased, and she could hear vehicles moving along the perimeter roads. It was just past 9 o'clock when Maria noticed the first sign that tonight would be different from any other night in her 3 years at the base. A convoy of unmarked vehicles had arrived at the main gate, and through the mess hall windows, she could see unusual activity in the compound's central area. Personnel were moving with purpose, and the normal evening routine had been replaced by what appeared to be preparation for some kind of significant event. Rosa appeared at Maria's side, having also been asked to work the extended shift. "Something big is happening," she whispered in Spanish, keeping her voice low enough that it wouldn't carry beyond their immediate area. Maria nodded, continuing her food preparation while keeping one eye on the activity outside. Whatever was developing, she had a feeling that her strange encounter with the 3 unfamiliar men during lunch was somehow connected to tonight's events. The pieces of a puzzle were beginning to form in her mind, but the complete picture remained frustratingly unclear. The kitchen filled with the aromas of the special dinner being prepared, but Maria's attention was divided between her cooking duties and the growing tension she could feel throughout the base. Every instinct honed during her years of careful observation was telling her that this night would test everything she had learned about survival, vigilance, and the delicate balance between civilian life and military necessity.